Hopefully I'm here. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. And obviously a huge thank you to the organizers. I mean, without this group that's pushing forward women's hockey, I don't know where it would be. So just a huge thank you, and so indebted to the work that everyone does to put this type of conference together. I am actually really under the weather. I don't know if it's like the end of the Stanley Cup, like just a letdown, but I have been really sick. So I will try to bring the energy, but you'll have to forgive me if you're watching this after the fact. This is, tough on a Saturday morning when you don't feel well. So I will jump into it. And for sure, Alyssa said that she'd, ask any questions you have at the end, so we can get into anything else that you want to know. Try to do kind of like a high-level overview for this presentation. So, a little bit of a history of Stathletes, what our company does. We don't really talk about it too much. We're typically B2B. And supporting leagues, teams, players, agents, trainers at the highest level. And obviously there's extremely high level women athletes. So we love to work on this side of the sport too. Some Olympic examples that I have, as well as the NWHL. Obviously this season was really exciting for us. Looking at larger data sets. So I've done some comparisons with the NHL, not because I want to compare men and women's hockey, but because we have a lot of data in the NHL. So thought that was very compelling. And then also how you can help a little bit of my feedback, what I've learned for working in women's hockey in different ways for about 10 years. So to give you a bit of overview of just how long and what Stathletes looks like, we were building software in 2008. So that maybe ages me a little bit, and started in women's hockey in 2013. So almost a decade. We were looking at CWHL at that time, college hockey. Officially got a first, big break in terms of like getting paid and doing work that was going to be used in terms of the industry at Pyeongchang. So I was able to go to Korea. I did both men's and women's hockey tournament there, as well as worked with some teams and players. So that was very exciting. And then obviously with the pandemic, it was, challenging, but the NWHL, it was very awesome to see their tournaments come together the two different times and be able to provide that as well for the Big Data Cup this year. And I actually really wanted to do all women's hockey. So that was my initial push, but with the shortened seasons and just some of that issues, just had to throw in some men's hockey too, because you want to make sure you get enough data for people to work with. But of course, love supporting women's hockey. Actually, even internally at Stathletes, we don't promote it that often, but we have had PWHPA players, and our one operations manager, who is far more important to the day-to-day than me, actually had her stick Amber Ellis in the Hockey Hall of Fame at one time. So we have very famous women's hockey players as well that have helped and have worked at Stathletes and currently work at Stathletes. As well on the women in tech side, Mirnaz and Pascal on the engineering front, as well as computer vision. So we really do have a great group and love to support the women's game. So, it's probably 100,000th of the games that we've done, unfortunately, in hockey, but always trying to move the dial, always trying to do more, and happy to pitch women's hockey at any turn. As well, Ty, the current commissioner of the NWHL, I actually met her on a board of advisors in baseball in Boston. So a very random occurrence about 4 or 5 years ago. And then look at now she's running the NWHL. So really cool to see the intersection of, women in business and women's hockey and push forward this sphere from that manner. So big shout out to, not only Ty, but Katie and everyone else at the NWHL that's been so open and supportive and really helped put some of the Big Data Cup together and figure out how to best get women's hockey in the hands of people that are super talented, like the ones on the call today. As well, we always collect all the data the same as the NHL data. So the full set that we have is very extensive, even for 10 years ago. So when people are like, oh, people haven't done this in women's hockey before, it's honestly just resources and money to scale to the whole league. So, don't really fall for marketing in terms of what can be done in women's hockey. It can be the same as the NHL. That's no issue. So to give some examples, this is actually a live real-time dashboard that came in, so you could see exactly where on the ice the shots were, if it was high scoring chances on net, hit or miss, some face-off stats too, trying to keep it, interesting, compelling, as well as like quite interactive. So you can see that this dashboard actually allows you, and I will turn off the volume, allows you to scroll through and actually interact with it, but it's also in real time too. So the data is actually populated as it occurs, which is interesting as well, both for media purposes, but also for players, teams, just to know like where people are shooting on certain goalies. This is, of course, Canada and the US, absolute barn burner of a game that went into shootouts. And, it would have been nice to see a Canadian win, but always great to see the US win for the sport to spread as well. So with the, better data sets, obviously you can get better tools as well. Different things can be automated. This on the left is just a highlight reel of expected goals from this Boston-Toronto game. So like the highest shot quality to the lowest shot quality, and it's like pre-populated right away. So there's no, manual overlay or interference in terms of figuring out what the expected goals are for this game. And then it can be tied to video for whatever type of purposes, coaching, players, trainers. So, we use that extensively, obviously, with the NWHL as well. And that was really awesome. On the right, I just put together really quickly on-man rushes. So just to watch that and just realize that, women's hockey is, dynamic, interesting, really fun game. And I think, we've seen, especially with the pandemic and the ability to reach more people and have that pitch that some of these sports are underserved. It's really nice to see more of the women's game in highlights and at the level of the NHL, because I think not only do these athletes train and work very hard for it, but it's a very interesting product. Here's just a quick tracking example. So here's one of the goals from the Toronto game. And then you can see the movement of the players, so just the player numbers that move on that 5-second clip. But anything is possible in terms of tracking and data, especially when you have the league behind you. And like I said, thanks to Ty and the NWHL, I can't thank them enough for helping on that side. So now I jump into a little bit of chagrin to compare it to men's hockey, but I just thought it would be very interesting for the group. Obviously, I have a lot of data and stats that we looked at. I blocked out some of them, but for the purpose of this, this comparison, we'll just look at even strength data. So all data is 5v5. And we'll first focus on shot attempts, and shout out to Dom for helping me put some of this together as well. Both the women and the men in my office and my group are very helpful in terms of supporting women's hockey. So I am just the voice today, the very sick voice today, but I'm very grateful for the work that they've done on not only the tournament, but on the Big Data Cup. So let's take a look at some differences between NHL and NWHL hockey. Note that there's significant differences. Cases where you can feel safe ruling out the influence of random chance are marked in yellow. So you can see, obviously shot distance for the NHL, shot angle for the NWHL, and so forth. So an interesting, takeaway from this slide is that in the NWHL, 2-on-1 shot attempts occur at triple the NHL rate at 5-on-5. So that was something that stood out in terms of that full tournament and the data that we have collected from this year. With that said, it's only the data collected from this year, so there could be some reasons for that, but we thought that was interesting enough to know. Now, when we take a look at this subgrouping of metrics, we can see the stark strategic differences between the two leagues. In the NWHL, shots are taken from closer, oftentimes from the slot, are more likely to land on goal, and are less likely to involve a screened goaltender. In the NHL, shots skew further away from the net, 4 feet on average, which with increased traffic and a significantly higher rate of deflections. In fact, we see a 2-fold increase in the percentage of shots getting deflected in the NHL. So on this plot, we are comparing 5v5 shot rates between the two professional leagues. For a given location, red shading indicates higher shot rates in the NWHL, and blue shading suggests higher shot rates in the NHL. Here we can see that women are attacking the slot at a much higher rate and are much less willing to take shots from the point. If we look at differences in shot conversion, we can see that on average, shots in the NHL are more dangerous from the same location. However, the difference is really only meaningful between 20 and 35 feet from the goal. Otherwise, the distance shot percentage curves are very similar. From the point where NHLers gain an edge in shot rates, their conversion rate is similar to that of the NWHL. But keep in mind, there is some uncertainty in this area due to the rarity of these shots in the NWHL. So it'd always be great to have more seasons and do more of this and have more data to do these comparisons. And if we have another conference like this next year, hopefully I have that data for you. Another cool thing to look at is where the puck carriers tend to travel after gaining possession of the cup. First, we can look at north-south movement. Orange represents a tendency to advance forward up the ice, and purple represents a tendency to track backwards. In both leagues, we see similar patterns, where skaters are able to move up the ice from the neutral zone and defensive zones, but run into difficulty when approaching the inner slot. Overall, we tend to see less forward advancement in the NWHL, potentially suggesting shorter skating routes and/or a greater tendency to track backwards or laterally with the puck. Interestingly, in the high slot, there is less forward advancement in the NWHL than there is in the NHL, even though the women's skaters managed more shots from the inner slot. Here, we have an east-west movement, orange indicating skating past the right, purple suggesting that puck carriers typically travel to the left. Along the board, skaters have no choice but to move towards center ice. So the patterns we see there are unsurprising. In the middle ice, things get a bit more interesting, where NWHL skaters demonstrate a slightly greater ability to track cross ice rather than being forced to the nearest wall. Now, we are going to look at the most common ways players gain possessions. In both leagues, recovering an unsuccessful shot attempt is a top method for gaining possession in the slot. In the offensive zone corners, both NHLers and NWHLers tend to gain possession via an indirect pass, typically a rimmed pass. Evidently, there's a key disparity across most of the ice surface, as NHLers tend to gain possessions from direct passes, whereas NWHLers are more likely to jump onto loose pucks. So here's just some of the fun, high level, different visualizations and charts that we were able to draw from NHL versus NWHL data. Obviously, a lot of the CWHL data, both the ranks and other issues with the video make it so it's not as great for comparison. So hopefully moving forward, we'll get very, good high def video setups for these women's hockey players in the rank so that we're able to do this type of work. And I would say that's one of my key takeaways too is, from this group and what you put out there on the internet, on Twitter, on social media, it's really important to, express that you really like this data or you like, to see women's hockey at this level, because I think that's really important in driving the key decision makers to realize that the more that they put on, the more that will be consumed and helps definitely people's business cases, mine included, in terms of doing more women's hockey. So in general, thank you so much to the organizers of this event and everyone else who pitched in, all the presenters. It's really about the collective. Like I said, it's amplifying, whether it's Big Data Cop, Ice Garden, all these sorts of women's groups that do amazing work, making sure that people know that not only is it being consumed, but it's wanted by the industry and that there is a very big and growing fan base for women's hockey. As well, obviously I did the CBC Olympic data, that was amazing. So to do that again this year for women's hockey if, tweet at them, say you want more data. It's always great when I walk in a room and they say, oh yeah, we saw it on Twitter that people are looking for that. That certainly helps, because it's me trying to pitch typically that this is not only wanted, but it's needed for the players, for fans, and to get that type of granular data out that I was able to from the Big Data Cup, so you can work with that and make your own metrics and come up with your own type of models. Obviously, NWHL, PWHPA, and whatever women's hockey looks like moving forward, I think it's incredibly important to not only support it, but support it from the data and analytics side. And then hopefully this year too, we can run the Big Data Cup again. We want to obviously put out even more data than we have in the past. I severely apologize for not putting out the shift times of the players. To be honest, I didn't even realize it, because usually we put that as a different chart instead of like attach it to events. So I'm sorry that you weren't able to work with shift data. That's a very easy thing for me to rectify in the future. So that's a non-issue at all. We have all that data. It's, very simple. And then also support people who are not just talk, but action. And, I think sometimes people think, oh, you're talking about a specific group, but I see this all the time in like women's sports, not just hockey, where, people see women or women in tech as marketing, as something that, they can use to say, look how great we are. And then they don't have follow-ups or business plans of how to keep going forward, leverage that, have scalability. So make sure that you put your time, resources, money, whatever that is, into people who are willing to stick around for the long term, that, the money is not just going back to major male corporations, but it's going to people who are going to reinvest in the women's game and that are going to keep developing not only women in sports, but that women athletes. Because I think at the end of the day, the people that benefit most from the work you do in the public and what I see out there are the women's athletes who, getting more visibility, getting their brand out there, spreading the word that like women's hockey players are awesome too and deserve our coverage, deserve our time, not just NHL players, I think is a really important and powerful message. So thank you for everyone bearing with me through my sickness today. Thank you, Alyssa and group. And we can, have any questions or chat, whatever you would like.
Yeah, I'm just glad that I fixed the issue everyone could hear my keyboard, because the speed at which I was firing off the screenshot keystroke during that presentation would have been noticeable. But a couple of questions from the chat. One was, how have you seen coaches / teams / players' attitudes towards data change throughout the time you've been working in the space?
I don't know if there's been like a dramatic shift. I mean, I think that there's a shift in sports in general to wanting to see more data. And I would say that, it's good for marketing too, right? If you don't have just beyond a basic box score, I think you miss like 80% of the players, right, in a hockey game. So a lot of these women who we knew were like good defensive forwards or good defensemen wouldn't show that up that often or wouldn't be talked about. So it's really cool to like see not only more women be, recorded and understood, but like parts of their game be able to like even those videos that I posted for, high XG or on-man rushes, like you'd see these women jump in on these video clips that like typically wouldn't be on the box score. And you're like, I know visually they're great players or they add to a team, but in the past we haven't been able to like quantify that. So seeing players come to us that are like, I want to make the Olympic team. What can I do? I'm on the fringe. I feel like those are conversations that we're having now that we didn't have 5 to 10 years ago. So I think it just depends on, the person and where they're at in their career. But I think everyone is like more and more interested in, not only the work that I do, but the work that all the people in the public do too. They read it, they look at it, they check out your stuff. So keep doing it.
Kind of very much linking into that. But the players in the player panel earlier seem to keep mentioning that they really like data, but as players, they didn't already know how to use it best. What do you think the next steps are in women's hockey in order to help players understand it better?
That's tough. I guess it's communication and resources. I mean, I think it's up to some national teams too to make sure that they have the resources available for the players and the tools able for the players to access it in a timely manner. And And that's always a challenge, right? Women's hockey, and just like any smaller league, it's all about resources. So it's just trying to make a business case of what works best and what sort of like low-lying fruit in terms of helping the players, and then how to roll that out to them. So it's not a really simple answer. I think it's, a path you sort of walk down and build. But like I said, I honestly think part of that path is some of the public work that's out there, because I think it gets people used to that dialogue and that discussion, and it becomes far more like mainstream than just like this crazy analytics model about shot quality, right? So the more that you can do and publish and talk about, I think it just helps the communication to players too, because they're far more used to it.
And also, how valuable is a trait like puck recoveries given the trends in possession games? Is this a skill coaches should focus on developing in their players?
Well, I mean, you want the puck. That's obvious. So I think it's a good skill. With that said, we don't have a ton of women's hockey data, so it is hard to make, very broad, sweeping statements. Do trainers work on it? Sure, like how to, like battles, like different types of puck recoveries. You're always trying to use your body, especially in women's hockey where there's not, the checking element, but there's a lot of contact as well. So, it's a slightly different game in some ways than the men's game, in terms of like body positioning. So I'd say, of course, I think every element of hockey is worked on by trainers. I don't think they overlook one area. Should it be more focused on than other areas? I'm not sure. It depends on the player and how they're developing. But it's certainly, an interesting stat or metric or data point of like how pucks are recovered, where they're recovered. And it does differ from it, women's hockey to the NHL. And some of that is body contact too.
Awesome. I think there's one or two more questions in chat, but unfortunately we are about to run out of time. So I don't know if you're going to be floating around in the Twitch, but if you are, people might be able to locate you there, or else direct them to you on Twitter, perhaps, to answer. But yeah, thank you so much for attending, and for all the work you continue to do to like just make all of this really cool data public. Like I know we all lost our minds when Big Data Cup data came out, and again, when you mentioned Big Data Cup 2, the chat yet again lost its mind. So, just really great to see that people are still excited about that. And yeah, thank you again for all of the work you do. It's been fantastic.
Yes, and thanks to the whole group. Without all of you, I honestly wouldn't be able to do women's